Yeah, I don't think it'll have any effect on the Russians in terms of what they do in their war against Ukraine. I think the big question is whether President Trump would be foolish enough to put these secondary sanctions on China and on India. I mean, with regard to China, he's had to back off with regard to tariffs because the Chinese have a lot of leverage over us when it comes to rare earths and rare earth magnets. They really have a lot of coercive leverage on us. So I don't see how he can possibly get tough with the Chinese with secondary sanctions of the magnitude that he's talking about. And with regard to India, it's really quite amazing what's happening there. It looked like the United States was going to have very good relations with India, with Modi in the driver's seat in India and Trump in the driver's seat here in the United States. They have a history of good relations, but those relations have gone steadily downhill since Trump took over. And if he were to put secondary sanctions on India, that would just wreck our relations with India. And that is not in America's national interest, because the United States and China have a vested interest in working together in terms of dealing with China. Furthermore, if he puts these sanctions on China and India and they actually go into effect, the end result is going to be disastrous for the international economy.
This just sounds like self-inflicted damage. Why risk breaking ties with India and China over a threat that probably won't work in the first place?
So I think this is all an empty threat, and I'm really curious what exactly he's going to do on Saturday that he thinks is going to bring the Russians or these other countries to their knees. You know, what I think what's going on here is that since he launched this tariff campaign, I think it was on April 2nd of this year, he's gone back and forth, but he has definitely levied tariffs on a lot of countries, and it has not damaged the American economy. So I think he believes, and his supporters believe, that Trump can levy tariffs and get away with it. There are no real costs to pay. The consumer is not going to have to worry about paying higher costs.
Feels like we're riding a high while ignoring the tab. These things pile up quietly, and by the time it hits, it'll hit hard and late.
But I think most people, and this would include me, believe that at some point the bill is going to come due. And when it does, he's going to be in serious trouble. But for the time being, he's operating on the assumption that tariffs are the magic weapon. They bring everybody to their knees, and we're not hurt at all. Many people in the American foreign policy establishment have no sense of the limits of American power, whether you're talking about military might or economic might. They think we can just run around the world pushing people around by threatening them. And if the threats don't work, we can use military force against them. Maybe you could think that way during the unipolar moment, but those days are in the rearview mirror. We now live in a multipolar world. China's a peer competitor. As I said, it's not plausible to argue that we can put 100% tariffs on China. We've gone down this road in the past few months. We tried to get tough with the Chinese, and Trump was forced to back off. Furthermore, he can't do this with India. It would be disastrous for American foreign policy. So I just don't know what these people are talking about. Maybe Trump is crazy enough that he'll try to do it.
It's like they're stuck in the 90s. We don't get to call all the shots anymore, and pretending we do just sets us up for an ugly surprise.
And we'll see what happens. But at some point, this is really going to come back and bite him in the hiney. It's not the strategic equivalent. That's the key point. When you talk about the Aleutian Islands, you're not talking about taking American real estate in the context of a war. There's no war over Alaska or Canada or anything like that. We're talking about taking Kaliningrad in the context of an almost war between the United States and Russia. I wouldn't even call it a proxy war. I call it an almost war because it's so close to being a war.
Right.
We've been very close to being fully at war with the Russians for over 3 years now, right? This is serious business. And we've made it clear to the Russians that we're bent on knocking them out of the ranks of the great powers. We want to defeat the Russians. So it's in that context that you have General Donahue talking about American or NATO troops taking Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is Russian territory. That's another way of saying it's sacred territory.
Yes, yes.
The idea that NATO would even threaten to initiate a campaign that involves invading and conquering Kaliningrad is almost unthinkable to me.
If the roles were reversed, we'd be losing our minds. This kind of talk only feeds paranoia and makes a hair-trigger situation even worse.
I mean, this is, in my opinion, a reckless statement. Look, if you're the Russians, right, and you know that Kaliningrad is exposed, the general is correct that it's exposed Russian territory because it's detached from Mother Russia and it's surrounded by a handful of NATO states. So it's exposed. And he's saying that we can take it very easily. And he's intimating that we may take it very easily. Very important to understand that. He's basically sending a signal. We're trying to send a signal to the Russians. We may take Kaliningrad.
You don't casually hint at invading Russian land and expect calm heads to prevail. It just invites panic and dangerous overreactions from Moscow.
This means that in a crisis, the Russians have a powerful incentive to preempt, to prevent that from happening. If you get into a crisis with the Russians, you do not want them to have an incentive to preempt. And this is what that does. We would have never done anything like this in the Cold War. If you go back and look at American policymaking during the Cold War, we were much more cautious. Now, you can say Russia's not the Soviet Union. The problem with that argument is that Russia has thousands of nuclear weapons, just like the Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons. And yes, Russia's not as powerful as the Soviet Union was, but that probably makes them more scared than the Soviets would have been in an analogous situation. So you don't want to threaten these people by talking about taking Kaliningrad with great ease. It just makes no sense at all.
Poking a cornered nuclear-armed adversary isn't strategy, it's recklessness. Cold War caution's gone, and that's a scary shift no one seems to grasp.
There are increasing numbers of people every week who are saying this is a genocide, or if it's not a genocide, it is a war crime, and that Israel needs to be punished and everything needs to be done to stop this genocide in Gaza. There's no question about that.
The shift in public opinion is slow but steady. More voices are calling it what it clearly is, and political silence is starting to crack.
And you see that with regard to countries like Britain, France, Canada, and now Portugal talking about recognizing a Palestinian state and even punishing Israel in certain ways. I think it's so clear at this point in time what the Israelis are up to that it's inevitable that this tide will only grow with the passage of time.
Israel is presented as though we are applying a campaign of starvation in Gaza. What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza. We've enabled the amount required by international law to come in.
Denying the undeniable only fuels global outrage. When even cautious politicians call it disgusting, you've clearly crossed a moral red line.
It's hard to find words to describe Netanyahu, and especially what he just said there. I mean, it's patently obvious that the Israelis are engaged in genocide, or if that word is too strong for you, mass murder. It's patently obvious that they're starving the population. They're creating a giant concentration camp now, and it's all aimed at pushing the Palestinians out of Gaza. It's just so obvious.
Keeping journalists out while entire populations suffer says it all. If you have to hide it, it's probably indefensible, and they know it.
And the lieutenant colonel who just talked to Tucker made this clear. And by the way, Judge, this is one of the reasons the Israelis don't want to let journalists and other observers into Gaza. They don't want those observers to see what's happening and then report back to people in the West. But some people get in, like this lieutenant colonel, and they tell you the truth. And it's consistent with everything you hear from UN workers, from aid workers, from doctors who are in there, and so forth and so on. This is a genocide. The Israelis are committing what is the greatest crime against humanity, genocide.
It's getting harder to sustain the eternal victim story while committing atrocities. Historical myths don't hold up well under global scrutiny.
Because what's going on in Gaza is just a continuation of a long story that started in the early 20th century. So they have not always been the victim. If you go to Nazi Germany and what happened during the Holocaust, of course, the Jews were the victims. They were not the victimizers. Nobody in their right mind would make that argument. But if you go to the Middle East, if you go to what was once Palestine and is now Israel, it's impossible to make the argument that the Israelis were the victims and not the victimizer. They were the victimizer. They went into an area where there were hardly any Jews, and the land and the villages and the people were Palestinians, and they stole their land, and they created this state of Israel. And to do that, you had to commit crimes. You had to be the victimizer. There is no way the Zionists could have created the state of Israel without being victimizers. And the principal victims were the Palestinians. As I like to say, and this is an argument that will strike most people as being on the extreme side, but it really is not. What the Zionists and now the Israelis have done to the Palestinians over time is one of the great crimes of modern history. Now, people may think John is making this up. This is just him putting the facts together to suit his own views. No, I learned this from reading books and reading articles that were written by Israelis and Western Jews. There is a huge amount of evidence to support the argument that the Israelis were the victimizers and the Palestinians were the victims in the context of the Middle East. There's just no question about this. And anybody who's interested and wants to study this issue will find plenty of supporting evidence for the point that I'm making. The Israeli state is going to remain intact. But the question you have to ask yourself is, what is that Israeli state going to look like when all of this is done? I think that what Benjamin Netanyahu has done is he has exacerbated serious tensions inside the body politic that were already there, that are going to continue well after he leaves office. He's also gotten Israel involved in conflicts in places like Syria, Lebanon, and with Iran in ways that are going to linger for a long time and cause really serious damage on the Israeli home front. I'm a firm believer that a thoroughly militarized state that is fighting wars all the time is undermining basic liberal values, basic decency on the home front. And you see this in spades inside of Israel when you look at the body populace's attitude towards what's going on in Gaza, right? Furthermore, he's got Israel stuck back in Gaza. The Israelis got out of Gaza in 2005, and they got out of Gaza in 2005 under the leadership of Ariel Sharon, who was no pussycat. And Sharon got out because Sharon understood full well that that place is a hornet's nest. Well, they're back in there, and they've been unable to expel the Palestinians. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how does this all end? And it's very hard to tell a happy story. The final point I'd make to you is that Israel is in a position where it is extremely dependent on the United States. Israel and the United States fight these wars together. They execute the genocide together. Israel is no longer the independent state that it once thought it was. So I think for all of these different reasons, Israel is a country that is in serious trouble. And that situation does not improve with time. If anything, it gets worse. Because if you look around the world, almost every leader, and here we're talking mainly about the West, almost every leader in the West is beginning to bend on what is happening inside of Gaza. You see this with the French, you see this with the British, the Canadians, right? They're all beginning to move in a way that is antagonistic towards Israel. Not completely, but Trump doesn't move at all. It's really quite amazing. And it's hard to believe that this is in the American national interest, that he thinks it's in our interest to support Israel no matter what. He is getting a huge amount of criticism for this, but he's not bending at all. And I sometimes wonder why that's the case. And I wouldn't be surprised if behind closed doors, he's been threatened in ways that make it clear that he better not show any criticism of Israel or he'll be punished for it.